With the rise of remote work culture and the increased responsibilities to address climate change initiatives, real estate developers and the facilities owners are forced to reimagine the transform the workspaces. Hi everyone, warm welcome to this virtual fireside chat, smart and sustainable workspaces hosted in collaboration with Jetronics and All Things Connected. This is CK Vishkarma, founder and CEO of All Things Connected, a transformation, digital strategy, and AIoT solutions company based out of Singapore with an active focus in Southeast Asia. I'm very pleased to join by the experts in an exciting dialogue on smart and sustainable workspaces, and we will discuss the challenges faced by the real estate ecosystem players and how the future workspaces will be enabled by the advanced technologies to help real estate developers by enhancing the values of the buildings and the service providers to transform the business models, create new value propositions for the tenants, and the safe environment for the users. There's a lot to unpack, but before we jump into the discussion, let me share some of my views, personal views on the topic of smart and sustainable workspaces and help you all who are still joining in for this discussion. Yesterday, I was speaking in one of the forums, and thankfully, after a long time, I was in a in-person forum in Expo. While I do miss a lot of interaction with my global colleagues, but the advantage we have with the virtual forum that we are able to invite a lot of people from globally as well. And yesterday, when I was talking on the stage with the facility owners and the real estate developers, one of the challenges which you always hear that CK, what is smart, what is sustainable, right? Because we throw a lot of technology terms when we talk about all these things, right? And we talk about UNGC goals, AI, machine learning, all the technology. But if I just reiterate what I shared yesterday also in terms of what we define as smart, and I do it regularly with my customers as well as professionals, that smart is nothing but is a sense to sense workflow. What it means is that there's a business sense, what we need to make when we try to do all these things smart. And in the process, when we know what exactly business sense we're trying to address by solving some operation problems or the business challenges, then we can think of what data do we need to sense, right? We talk about workforce management, we talk about predictive maintenance, we talk about energy efficiency. So a lot of use cases as a facility owner you can think of that before we jump into the technologies, let's understand what is the pain point we're trying to address in day-to-day activities as well as looking ahead maybe 2030 down the line. So that's first, that smart is not about AI or machine learning or IoT, it's more about how do we look at the workflow design, the way we build, design, operate, and manage our facilities. At the same time, what is sustainability? Right? All of you must be familiar with the 17 UNGC goals. And I can tell you in my experience and conversation with a lot of leaders that no company I can tell you who can achieve all the sustainability goals, 17 goals, right? So how can digitalization and the sustainability could converge the two topics to help us achieve, if not all of some of the goals before we talk about reporting mechanism, whether GRI, TCFD, and many more. So it's not about reporting per se, it's but more about how do we achieve those goals, right? So think of it, are we trying to achieve more towards renewables, energy efficiency? Are we trying to reduce the waste created in the buildings? Are we trying to make it more safe and secure for the workforces and the tenant, which is more towards EHS topic? So basically, instead of looking at sustainability as a separate topic, how do we converge the two topics and help achieve some of the goals? That's what I talk about sustainability, right? And we'll continue the discussion as we go forward. Just to summarize, as I mentioned, that sustainability and smart is not about technologies, it's about how do we change the way we design, build, manage, and operate our facilities and the services. So now let's meet our experts. And I would like to invite Ruben and Khalil on this virtual stage. So give me a second. I'm just sending them an invite. They should be joining in a second. And here is Khalil and Ruben on the stage.
Hello. Thank you very much, CK.
And I'm just waiting for Khalil to join in. Khalil, I can't see him yet. Let's give him a couple of minutes. So while we are inviting Khalil on the stage, Give me a second. Okay, somehow I'm not able to see him. Okay, he's joining.
I think it's coming. Yeah.
Hi, Khalil. Maybe you could help me to enable the camera, please. Hi, Khalil and Ruben again. Thanks for joining on the watcher stage. I think it's much faster, though there is still a bit of gap in the network sometime. But I still believe that doing virtual is still faster than getting the people on the physical stage. So welcome you both. Thanks for joining in. Ruben is joining us from Spain, and Khalil is from our own Singapore. So before we start the discussion, I would like to request both of you just do a quick, like 2-minute introduction for both of you. We will start with Khalil, if you like. Okay, Khalil, are you able to hear me? It looks like he has some network issue. I'm not sure. The Murphy's Law. While we are getting Khalil to get the audio, maybe Ruben, you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you very much, CK. Of course, a pleasure to be here and talk about this exciting topic. As you say, there are many things to unfold, a lot of concepts that get mixed. So, by the way of introduction, my name is Ruben Jimenez. I'm responsible and I'm heading what we call the IoT and Smart Spaces portfolio within Getronics. And as said, I mean, looking forward to together with Khalil and you to talk about these main topics and trends on smart workplace. As Getronics, we have deployed smart solutions in many spaces, and I think that's an important thing that we will need to also talk about, which is what do we mean in space? I mean, because in general, we will immediately translate smart workplace as an office building. But we have deployed solutions in ports, airports, hospitals, etc., etc. So I would say that a workspace is the place where people work, and that could mean many things, and solutions could differ a lot depending on that ecosystem. So with that, let's see if Khalil.
Yeah, I'm just see that he seems to have a bit of weak signal today, apparently. Again, so let's continue the conversation while Khalil is sorting out his network, I guess. Yeah, so thanks for again giving the quick introduction about yourself and Getronics, and we'll get to know more about Getronics and what Khalil does at Boasted. Yeah, Khalil, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we lost you for some time, so thanks for figuring out the network. So we were just doing a quick round of introduction. So Ruben went through a bit of background of what he does, what Getronics do. Maybe for rest of the audience who is joining in, maybe you can also give a quick introduction about yourself and what you do at Boasted.
Sure, thank you so much. First thing first, apologies for the technical issues. I think there's some connectivity issue we are facing here. But definitely I'm honored today to be in this fireside chat with yourself, CK, and definitely with Ruben and the rest of the participants who are engaged in this session. So a quick introduction of myself. My name is Khalil. I head the digital delivery side of Bausted Project. Bausted Project, who we are. We are also a A1 builder in Singapore context, and we are also a property real estate developer in the industrial space in Singapore. And we do have some regional office within the ASEAN region, places such as Vietnam. And effectively, my role is to promote and drive digitalization and innovation. And definitely, smart spaces is one of those things that we are exploring. And we have already implemented a few of those initiatives together with Getronics on some of our properties. So basically, I hope that gives you a flavor of what we are trying to do here, also as an organization. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Khalil and Ruben again for quick introduction. And for the audience who have joined in and maybe joining in also as we go along, uh, it's not just a kind of a one-way communication while we three are on the virtual stage. I would like to you all to be involved in this discussion. There will be opportunity to ask questions via the Q&A tab. If you're dialing it from your mobile phone, you should be able to see that, or you can post it into the chat. I will try to avoid, but there's a Q&A tab enabled. Rather, you could post a question there, and you can upvote the questions also. If there is same question which you see somebody has posted, better to upvote it. So we'll keep the question towards the end of the session, but I will pick it up maybe some of the question as we go along in the conversation, right? So don't wait for the last 10 minutes. Go ahead and start asking the questions as we go along in the conversation. So let's begin the conversation. Let's slowly try to deep dive in the topic of smart and sustainable workspaces. Right? As I was sharing in the introduction about the definition, so let's try to get the definition right. What is smart and sustainable workspaces? And all these three words, smart, sustainable, and workspaces, can mean a lot or maybe nothing as well, right? So workspaces could be your office buildings, a shopping mall which you visit over the weekend, a warehouse, like huge warehouses like Amazon, or maybe airports as such, right? So workspace varies a lot. Similarly, smart could be a simple mobile app, right? Or could be a sensors monitoring your temperature or air quality in the building, or it could be a super complex machine learning algorithm based smart integrated facility management solutions. And sustainable could be also many like renewable energies, cutting down waste, reducing the accident, and so forth. So we've seen the real estate developers, owners, and facility managers adopting these new technologies for years, right? It's not something as such a new thing. So what has changed in last 5, 10 years suddenly that these terms are discussed more often? So maybe Ruben and Khalil, could you help us define what is smart and sustainable workspaces in your personal view? And what do you think, and why do you think the real estate ecosystem player now should bother about it and care about it? And maybe to help moderate the discussion, I'll request maybe to start with Khalil first.
Thanks, CK. Yep. Maybe I will share with you those views. Again, some of those may be my own personal view, but at the same time, I also want to share with you my organization view on why we are going into smart, and definitely we talk about sustainability later on, right? Let's begin with my own personal view. I think the environment is changing. We are now living in a time that is unpredictable, right, and volatile. I think in terms of the built environment and the real estate, the whole built environment sector in Singapore, we have gone through a lot of transformation in the last 5 years. And in the real estate part of things, again, with regards to building and facilities management and the smart building application, as a organization, we are looking at how then we can optimize the use of technology to augment, right, whatever we have been doing for the past 20 years or 30 years as a developer. So I look at two things. What drive us today to adopt some of these smart solution, whether from the app's point of view or even putting additional sensors to monitoring building performance, right? First, we are looking at the user experience, right? We want to ensure that when we lease out or when we rent out a building or a unit, the user experience can be enhanced. That's one. Second, that give us a cutting edge or differentiation from some of other developers within the real estate space of the industrial facilities in Singapore. That's one. Second, we are also looking at profitability and also productivity. So what we mean by productivity today is definitely we know that we want to cut some of those mundane work process as part of our building management. And definitely we see a lot of automation involved by using smart building application, right, such as default reporting, booking of car park system. And these are a few examples that we are already embarking on, and it continues to drive our organization to reach that point where, you know, there's both productivity and profitability for the organization. Now, back to my personal view, I think again, in Singapore context today, we are talking about some of those labor-intensive process in terms of building management and facilities management. And I see that slowly we are moving towards a lot of remote monitoring, whether from the security point of view or in fact even for the building managers to rectify some of those defects and also building in terms of operational on a daily basis. So I think the whole idea here is to cut down the number of human labor intensive approach to some of these processes, and I wouldn't say replace but augment them with smart building technologies. So that's where we are today, and definitely it will help us to use those data again for predictive analytics or prescriptive analytics to some of the buildings that we have today within the organization and that we own. Thanks.
Thanks, Khalil. So similar question, Ruben. So I'm sure you have a lot of discussion with internal team as well as the external customers. So when they ask what is smart and sustainable, so what is your typical answer to them?
So you both have touched upon many items already that surely resonates with the audience. It's difficult sometimes to produce a definition when you have such broad items, right? Within smart, you can understand many things, and Khalil touched correctly on many of those applications. But first of all, I'd like to clarify, because within your question you have smart and sustainable, and they appear, and sometimes they are approached like they are two different things. I mean, the way I would understand a project or an approximation for a smart space, whatever that is, for example, a smart building, I would definitely try to ensure that both are connected, in the sense that I don't foresee that you're designing a project to make your building smart and not having sustainability as one of the outcomes. I mean, it has to be included. I mean, they cannot be seen as separate things. If we go back to the point of definition, I mean, I tend to use a sentence that might sound a bit of a cliche, but I think it helps. I mean, it's same as information makes us smart, the human beings. What I would say is that any space or ecosystem will be smart thanks to data. And I think Khalil mentioned that a couple of times already. In order to produce all of those use cases, you need to collect data. And I think you mentioned that in the introduction as well. In a nutshell, I mean, I don't think we should be lost in technologies, but think more at that level of the use case, what I want to achieve, and then we go back and see what technology can enable that and capture the data that I need in order to create the desired outcome. In terms of sustainability, I think it's important to mention a couple of things. I think probably everyone has read one or two articles or papers where the buildings are the most, they are the top one in terms of electricity consumption. It is, I mean, you know that these studies can be, I mean, differ a bit, but in general, you will see that between 42 and 50% of the electricity is claimed to be consumed by buildings. So definitely, and by the way, is the biggest asset in the world consuming electricity and energy. So there is clearly something for the audience that we have today in their agenda that they need to look into that from many angles. I mean, those same studies will probably say that 50% of that consumption is in fact wasted. So there is clearly something to be done in that space. I'm not sure for Singapore in particular, but clearly at least half of this world these days is struggling with also the fluctuation in price on electricity. So and energy. So that is something that needs to be tackled for sure. And just let me finish this energy point with a couple of observations. When you approach a project in terms of energy efficiency, the most immediate translation is going to be, I'm going to save energy. Okay, so you are affecting, let's say, the bottom line, your costs in the organization. But I think it's important that we don't forget that there are also elements in these projects that can help you with the top line, with the revenue income. Two angles on that. One, there are green bonds, funds, et cetera, that I think the company should start looking at because it's definitely worthy. And the other one, and I think very important, and we will see an increase in that sense, is consumers, employees will look for companies that are offering that commitment. So I think today it sounds a bit naive. Maybe it depends a lot on the generations, but we clearly see a trend where employees and consumers will opt for companies that are committed with the green agenda. Yeah. And I'll stop that because that was probably too long.
Right. So thanks for setting the kind of definition correct. And if I continue with you, Ruben, and as a global head of IoT portfolio and strategy at Jetronics, I'm sure working with multiple customers, having seen many scenarios, and some of them you already mentioned about like energy. Khalil also mentioned about like cost of talent, especially like in Singapore, or efficiency. So there are a lot of challenges the real estate developers and FM professionals are trying to address. But at the same time, we know that we can't address all the problems same time. So in your conversation, typically, if you have to kind of give me like top 3 or 4 organizational challenges, and we'll talk about technology challenges later, but more from the organizational challenges is more about. So what are those things like? Is it finance? Is it about funding? Is it about people? What do you hear globally?
Yeah. So I mean, energy efficiency and the green agenda is definitely one of those 3 or 4 that are put on the table. And as I said, most of the times the starting point is how can I save energy? Okay, so it's trying to affect the cost base. But that's clearly one of the key points. I won't go much. Maybe the only point that I will add is that some of the projects and positions that we've seen is that the companies try to promote as well more sustainable, for example, ways of transport, or making the tenants in a building, for example, participant of that green agenda. Yeah, those two. The other one that clearly stands out, especially in the last 2 years, is the occupants, the employees, the users' wellness, safety, and security. That's COVID has accelerated that in an incredible way. So that usually will translate into access control in the way they can get into the building, air quality. And when I mean air quality, yeah, I mean I'm talking about renewing the air, temperature optimization, enable, for example, facilities booking, because in the return to office policies, you will probably see a gradual approach. Not everyone will come to the office. So you're offering tools that the users can just book their desk or meeting rooms, knowing who's going to go there and then decide based on that. There are a lot of solutions in that sense. So let me say user experience is in the top of the list. Another one would probably be specifically for this market and the audience that we have is knowing my building KPIs. I think, or facilities KPIs. There are some solutions already in place for several years. We have BMS, building management systems, but they are usually a bit limited. So another point that they want and they put on the table as a key requirement is I want to know more on how my building is performing and doing. And probably the last one, which is related to this, is to see how they can optimize that facility management overall, avoiding disruption with predictive maintenance, as you mentioned before. Khalil mentioned very clearly as well workload reduction by automating certain processes, and then offering smart experiences to the users, as an example. Yeah.
Right. Let's see. Khalil looks like still having some network issues. Khalil, are you able to hear us? Okay, looks like we still have some network issue. Looks like today the network is not in his favor. But in any case, let's continue the conversation while he comes back online. right? So as you mentioned earlier, that some of those challenges more specific around energy efficiency and workforce management. So those are typically like cost-centric focus, right? How do we
Mhm.
reduce the cost of my operations? How do we cut down the cost? At the same time, while we try to cut down the cost, we can't bring the cost down to zero, right? So there's still, we can do optimization maybe, right? Reduce the number of people, but they still need some people, number of people.
Mhm.
So how do you approach it more towards the top line, the value perspective? So, and any thoughts, any ideas that how this
Sure.
conversation goes? That okay, we are capturing a lot of this data, all this stuff from different sources, but now what more we can do, which we were not able to do before?
Mhm.
Any
Mhm.
examples?
Yeah. I mean, I can give one example, and I think probably Khalil will add to that. But what we've seen is that they could be adjacent business that you can get. I mean, I'm going to show one, might sound very basic example, but if you have, for example, an office building where you have a clear energy policy, where you're trying to, to optimize the HVAC system and saying up to this hour, this is what we understand is working hours. But you can offer, thanks to these tools, the ability to the tenants to extend and buy. So this is something that wasn't that possible a few years back, but now you can select easily by tools. Look, I have a workforce team today because of a task force that I need to solve or close a project until 1 a.m. in the morning. You can buy HVAC to your landlord. And all of that automated, it will go to the billing system, etc., etc. Catering systems is another one. So I think probably companies, thanks to these tools and functionalities, can think on what I call adjacent business, and that will definitely support the top line.
Right. And some of the example, if I share with you, while many of them have not been able to realize it. So one conversation I was having like just before COVID, because a lot of things have changed post-COVID and even during COVID. So pre-COVID, one of the challenges always among the owners was how do I continue the long-term tenancy agreement with the tenants, right? Because every month of the loss of tenancy is a loss to the business, right? So the salespeople, if I would say, were supposed to keep these contracts year after year. They want to create some additional value for the tenants, basically. Now this tenant could be an office owner, like maybe Jetronics renting out a space in the building, or could be a shop owner in the shopping mall. So this way we're discussing with a couple of owners that this investment of innovation or technology, where does it come from? Do we start charging the tenants, or do we start charging the shop owners, or should this be investment from the building owners? So in my view, and this is where I want to hear your views also, that in my view, what I suggest them that look at the loss of opportunities. If this tenant goes away, for example, what business do we lose? So a month of loss is going to cost maybe, I don't know, 10,000, or could be a 100,000, also depend on the size of the tenant. So why don't you invest to keep this tenant agree and then create this value addition as such? So any ideas on this new creation of the financial part of it?
So we've seen different examples in that sense. I mean, it's not that easy for landlords or building constructions to justify these investments. I know they face a barrier when it comes to, okay, that sounds fancy, it looks good, conceptually I understand it, but they want to understand what do I get back if I invest in this, no? So one of the things that usually it might sound very simple but works pretty well is doing POCs, proof of concepts, that will certainly offer a smaller scope, real value. With that, we've seen cases where they were able to build then a longer strategy, business case, investment to be proposed. In terms of modeling, I think I don't think there is a preferred formula in that sense. I mean, I think it depends more on the belief that that's going to be a success, that is a bet, let's say, from the mall or the owner of the building to decide the investment if they have the capacity. There've been also formulas where it's a joint effort. Okay, and I think we need to start thinking as well on what I call the ecosystems, and that's a trend that we see growing over and over again, especially in this IoT market where I firmly believe is very fragmented. There are a lot of super niche, well specialized companies, but not everyone able to cover A to Z, the whole chain. No? So I think probably there is no perfect answer for that. There is no one single formula. I think the idea is we need to be creative, and all of the parts and stakeholders in that equation have a say in order to implement one of these projects. There has to be some elements from the buyer, let's say. There have to be some investment probably from the different providers and the different, let's say, solvers of the problem. And then the end customer will probably have a say too. Yeah.
Right. So while we're having again some technical issue with Khalil and hopefully sort it out soon. So let me just take the conversation because some of the question I had, I wanted to have both of you together in the conversation. So let me take a conversation from the chat I see from Dustin. He's a CEO of Yoohoo, and I know Yoohoo is they provide air purification service for indoor solutions, both hardware as well as services. So his question is, how do you shift the conversation with prospective customers from the cost reduction perspective, i.e. energy savings and efficiency, to value creation, better health and well-being, branding, data-driven sustainability reporting, when the focus of the client, and particularly in Asia, which I also see, and I agree with him, is always about reduction of the cost, right? Not so much on the value creation. And there are like only few who focus on the value side of it, right? So yeah, so you kind of answer it, but if I kind of drill a little deeper, and you mentioned that there's no formula as such, and we are also trying to create, if not, I would say formula of ROI, but some sort of a methodology to be able to justify the benefit and the impact. So what is your view on giving them some thought process of a structured approach that yes, we do need to look at the short-term cost focus activities, but don't just narrow down your thought process around the cost, but look at the long-term investment. Because if I just add quickly here that it may happen that when you look at only the cost benefit in the cost is, let's say, saving of $500,000, for example. And it may happen in some cases that cost of the solution is going out maybe $1 million. So this delta of $500,000, if they just look at purely cost perspective, that okay, you're saving me $500,000 and you're asking me to spend $1 million, so obviously it doesn't make sense. So how do we help them that this additional $500,000 of investment is going to bring you this other benefits, whether tangible or intangible? So how do you go about this kind of conversation?
Allow me to be very plain, clear, transparent on this. I mean, number one, this is a challenge that is not necessarily, let's say, ring-fenced in the conversation we are having today. It's a classical difficulty to put the intangibles, or let's say the value created, that are more subjective, no, like employee satisfaction, employee experience, etc., etc. I understand that, and is a typical question and challenge that you will have while presenting these projects. My advice there would be, and the way we tend to approach it is, be brave. I mean, be bold. I mean, of course, if you get the conversation going over and over again on cost versus return in terms of materials, you probably will end up with a return of investment that is going to be too long, or it might not be that attractive. Yeah. So if we're talking about value creation on user experience or some things that will be considered intangibles, my way of approaching is put it anyways. There are papers, there are articles, there are market analytics that will tell you that customer experience will give you certain elements and benefits on, for example, less attrition. Less attrition can be also through papers, for example, and scientific approaches. have been calculated with costs. So if you lose an employee, that's one of the variables that are using. For every employee you use, you might be spending between 6 to 8 months of the salary of the employee you lose to bring someone in, right? And it is about putting all of those together and trying to translate that as close as possible. I'm not saying that we should create fantasies and things that are, but we need to be bold, because in everyone's head, we know that is a reality. So trying to translate that into a specific Excel formula that is going to give you the dollar detail, that will never happen. But I think we need to be brave and bold and present things that we all believe it's true and translate into something. And then, of course, there might be different ways of understanding. The firm believer will say, yeah, I buy it 100%. I'm more conservative. You might be right, but I'm going to download it to 50%. Fine. But at least you have a way to quantify the intangibles. That's the approach that I would do.
Yeah, I agree with you, and glad to have Khalil back. Looks like, again, some Murphy's Law's network is not in your favor, Khalil. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, I can. Thanks. Again, apologize for that.
No worries. No worries. So while you are away for a while, I was discussing with Ruben on some of those topics, and what I told that I want to have your views also on those same question. So Boasted, I was doing research. Boasted is like 200-year-old company, right? And I'm sure in this 200 history, they've seen a lot of challenges in the past, and I'm sure you're preparing for the future as well, right? So in your observation as a company who have to transform with the time, again, what are the top 2 or 3 challenges which you are trying to address today? But what are you preparing for as we go along in the next, I don't know, 5, 10, 20 years? So maybe if you, without disclosing too much about the strategy, if you could share with the participant here that what you have learned so that they may not have to repeat the same thing, but something to help them shape the future as a company.
Right. Thank you. Thanks. Maybe once again, my thoughts on this is quite straightforward and simple. I think you put it rightly. I think Bausted, we have a legacy of over or about 200 years, and Bausted Project Singapore, we are part of that legacy. And the whole idea here is, again, we want to future-proof ourselves, right? Beyond just future-proofing some of the buildings that we own, manage, and the properties. Again, I fall back to our strategy in terms of the user experience, right, for the tenants. And again, things are changing. We talk a lot about accelerating some of this transformation. And definitely, as what Ruben mentioned earlier, we in Bausted, we believe that sustainability and digitalization, it goes hand in hand. It's not a silo. Basically, they complement each other or augment each one another. So again, if I go back to our strategy and our vision is to tap on not just the buzzword of sustainability and smart spaces, but it's the whole experience that you get when you enter the building, making sure that you have a holistic experience. And again, some of these data that can be collected will be used some and human behavior in that sense. So that's where we are coming from, CK, right?
Sure. Yeah. So I hope the network stays with us for the rest of the time. And also just adding one other question while you are away, I was discussing with Ruben, and there was a question also from one of the participants as well, the ROI discussion basically, right? The value creation. So as a company, I'm sure you have a task to cut down the cost of operation, which I'm sure you can do a lot with technology, but same time, how do we help the stakeholders internally to think about the value creation, right? And I'll repeat the same question like I shared with Ruben, that maybe the cost you can try to cut down $500,000, but your solution may come for $1 million. So how do we help with the rest of the $500,000 gap to create the value? So have you come up with some sort of formula, ROI formula? And how do you go about this justification of the investment internally from the stakeholders?
Interesting. I think maybe I start off with a very practical and pragmatic approach to this. Again, till today we are struggling with that. Getting the ROI, and there are tangible and intangible benefits to this approach. Again, if you talk about costs, up to date, if we talk about low hanging fruits that we want to capture from the tangible benefits, definitely tracking energy performance of the building, putting sensors, making sure lights are being optimized. These are some of those savings that we can get. Definitely, if you talk about investment, and their technology is not cheap, I can say. But the question is, what if we don't do this, right? Rather than if we continue to do this. If we don't, then I think if we, again, looking forward as a forward-thinking company, we have a vision that we want to make sure that the buildings that we own and the properties that we own are smart enough. And we are thinking long term here, not just 5 years. We are talking about a building life cycle where we are going to manage and operate them for the next 20 to 30 years down the road. So that's where, in the long term, where you can calculate your ROI, your investment or return of investment. So those are some of the tangible benefits you can see. But again, I go back down. I think someone wrote about user experience, and these are really intangible benefits that the tenants and the user get. And that's where we are also coming from, definitely as a group, as an organization. So again, those are my answers to your question, right? I do see that maybe we haven't get back on the challenge. Definitely just now I was cut off. But I think one of the challenge that we face, even before talking about getting ROI, is we are talking about data collective, trying to collect all this data with the correct data, and then you are able to have your return of investment using all this data. And there's a cliche again. People talk about data is the new currency, right? This is where we come from. We need to optimize. We need to use analytics for all the data that we have, and then definitely it's going to be part of your return of investment. That's how we see it. But the challenge here is how then you trust the data that you collected, right? So this is very important for us as an organization. Digital among all the stakeholder. And again, for Baustat, it's not just we alone, it's part of the ecosystem that is within the properties and the real estate management or the building and facilities management, that we want to bring them along. So it is part of the whole ecosystem that needs to have the buy-in and have the same alignment. If the stars are aligned, definitely you can see the ROI will be definitely faster. Not even 5 or 10 years. It can be even earlier. Definitely, if everyone play the same game with you and the stars are aligned. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, thanks, Khalil. And just a reminder to the participants. So we're going to open up the floor for the Q&A in a couple of minutes. So please start posting your questions. I already see one questions coming in, and some of the questions were in the chat. So please post the question in the Q&A tab to help us moderate efficiently. And I think you both mentioned kind of green bond also in your kind of conversation some point of time. So again, going a little bit deeper again on the financing part of it, because at the end of the day is always the conversation, who pays for it? Is the user going to pay for it? The tenant's going to pay for it? Is the builder's going to pay for it? But somebody have to pay for it. But I see this last few years, the discussion about the green bond, the conversation on the financing, the third party financing model, if I would say. So just quick views from both of you, maybe going with Ruben, that have you seen this more discussion that, okay, third parties are getting involved to finance these projects, and in terms of green bonds or any other model? I don't know. Any else you see? I think, Ruben, I'm losing your audio.
No, it was me that wasn't mute in order to
Okay.
reduce. Thank
Okay.
you. Sorry for that. No. I was just saying that indeed, the as I said before, to me, it's a combination, and it will depend on the project. The funds clearly, for example, and I know there are the green bonds in Singapore, but in Europe clearly is a huge investment, and I think companies should be as Khalil mentioned, looking forward for it. I mean, take advantage because now there is funding. I mean, my advice there is at some point it's going to be mandatory, and you're not going to get the funds. So I think it's definitely something to explore, and it's not always, not necessarily always will need to come from the buyer, let's say. I think us, for example, as a service provider, as an integrator, we can facilitate. We are well versed on how those work, and we can go and facilitate this and be part of the proposal, meaning that hey, at some point you will need to be carbon neutral. We're having, for example, conversations with airports with this is a key thing for them. And they really appreciate the fact that we can explain how those things and how you can approach those bonds. So to me, it needs to be a joint effort. But my advice, as Khalil mentioned, is look forward for it, because at some point it will become law, and your results you will need to report. So it's not only that you need to comply, you need to start reporting already. That's what probably we're going to see in many let's say westernized countries. You will need to start reporting, but at some point that reporting of the energy, same as you report your taxes and your balance sheet, you will need to do the same with the energy.
Right, and a similar question to Khalil as well. In Singapore, we have seen kind of rise of the green bond discussion, and I know a couple of developers who have been actually getting benefit out of this. So, what is your views on this green bond initiatives? And if you like to share, if at all, has Boasted been actively involved in this kind of activities?
Yeah, thanks, CK. Yeah, maybe to everyone here to answer that question, we are one of the first few. I think is announced last year in January, where one of our property development in One North Buona Vista, Alice, we secured 130 million green bond at a very competitive interest low rate, right? So I think we are no stranger to that. Again, this is also part of our initiative to be a sustainable in terms of business and also environmental. So the building that we own, Alice in particular, we have embarked on a lot of energy saving implementation, such as district cooling and also rainwater harvesting. These are so that allows us. And moving forward, because of this, again, in the near future, most of our own development, we are going to apply for green bond, and this gives us the drive to continue this sustainability effort. Definitely with the push of digitalization, augmenting this sustainability effort, right?
Thanks, Khalil.
Thanks.
I have a couple of still more questions, but I'll park it if I have time personally, because I think there are some questions from the audience. So let me start taking a couple of questions from the audience. And there's a question from Ajay Nair. He asked that what are your views on connected workspaces management from the city administrator perspective? So yes, building owners are going to hopefully deploy such solution, but is there any bigger benefit for the city administrator if you add another layer of intelligence on top of it? Have you seen? Maybe I'll let Ruben answer that first.
Yeah, so let me see if I understood correctly the question. The question is, if you're talking mainly about solutions that are ring-fenced to the buildings or the spaces themselves, and I think the question is, what about the collectivity of those projects, and if there is any layer above that controls, monitors, or
yeah, the entire city, like smart city kind of conversation, that individual buildings getting beeping something data, then we can make some better sense out of it.
Yes. So there are projects. I mean, of course, I mean, everyone here has heard about smart cities and some public city projects in order to start, offering better services to the citizens. I'm in fact very passionate about the smart city concept. However, the question moved from the ring-fenced approach projects from a building, and then we move to the city. There is clearly, as far as I've seen, my personal experience, not still a very good connection between those two projects. So we've seen initiatives, big ones indeed, for smart cities in order to, they are public. Then you have projects within buildings or spaces that are generating their own data and they're generating their own benefits. But I don't see still the connection and let's say from a mainstream point of view or from a on a wider, let's say, scope. Certainly, there are some cities that have started sharing their data, for example, to be used also in other projects that are more centric. But without a doubt, smart cities is going to be one of the bigger trends. Let me say, though, and I finish with this, that we've been hearing about smart cities probably for 10 years, and we don't seem to have, with few exceptions and very fancy use cases, let's say the core of what smart cities should be doing and they want to do for the citizens, I think it still needs to ramp up. And one of the key elements could be that one, that we connect individual initiatives towards the overall of the city.
Right. If I just ask a couple of feedback from Khalil also, this since Boasted has so many properties of different type of categories maybe. So obviously making the whole Boasted facility smarter, but how do you see the collaboration with, let's say, government of Singapore and the Smart Nation initiatives? Have been like engaging at a city level?
Yeah, thanks, CK. Okay, maybe I start off with this. I think in Singapore we are quite fortunate. I think the drive, again, the approach is a top-down approach. You have seen the government is quite clear on the smart city initiative that they have. And if you just talk at a level or at the stage where we want to construct a building, some of this information can be retrieved from that smart building initiative. Say, for example, Singapore Land Authority. So in that sense, some of those data that can be optimized for building during the construction stage. But I think what's missing at this point of time is connecting once the building is completed at a larger level, whether it's at a district level or even at the city level. So I think that's still missing. I can share with you. That's our experience. It's still silo. The integration is have yet to be discussed. Maybe not with Bausted. Definitely us as a private developer and organization, we are very open to explore how then we can connect this back together, whether at a business park level, district level, or even city level, or even at a nation level. So I think that's where we are today, CK.
Sure. I'm sure, yes, it has a lot of things we need to address in terms of infrastructure readiness, interoperability, a lot of such challenges which we need to address before we start kind of as small as an elevator within the building and then the whole smart building versus the whole smart city. So I think there's a multiple layers to it. And each layer will have different value creation, whether and smart elevator guys would want to be able to predict the elevator failure versus the building owners would want to see the different value creation beyond saving the cost. And the smart cities initiative will talk to about maybe even as interesting as maybe traffic management, for example, right? So utilizing the data from the buildings, how do we maybe redesign the whole building and infrastructure around it from the urban planning point of view? I'm just looking at any question. If anybody has, please go ahead and post it while I look at it. If there's any question. So if I just continue, one last question from my side before we kind of wrap up the discussion. And we all want to connect all machines, systems, processes, buildings across the city is connected. And maybe I'll start with Ruben first because as a smart and sustainable solution providers, whether we are integrating a BMS, talking to EMS, or deploying some new IoT solution and integrating with access control system. So a lot of such solutions, obviously we all agree that integration will help, right? But now in the cybersecurity world, if we talk about and we say that the chain is as strong as the weakest link, so that I can hack my system from my camera maybe, or maybe access control system. And as a solution provider, Jetronics, what is your view? And like, how do you help the solution provider that whatever's first from Jetronics point of view, the solution you deploy is kind of end-to-end secure. At the same time, what are your maybe one or two advice for the real estate developers and facility managers to think about cybersecurity in the beginning? So any thoughts on the cybersecurity?
Sure. I mean, I'm not sure we probably will have enough time to tackle the security element. So let me give you a very summarized answer. So security is fundamental. that's the headliner. I mean, without a doubt, security needs to be an integral part of any solution, right? And by the way, IoT solutions, smart solutions will be a combination of different layers of other technologies that will probably exist. We probably adding the element of the sensors, right? So but that's physical security, so manipulating those sensors from a physical point of view. And you have those sensors will capture data and send that data. So you have a network layer on it. That data will be probably stored in either a server or the cloud. So you need to have the security around that server and the cloud, and then you will process that data with applications, with analytics, etc. So you need to secure those applications. With this, what I mean is that when you build a project, you cannot approach this like, I'm going to build a solution and then I'm going to add a layer of security. To me, that's insufficient. You need to create the security as a transversal part of the whole pack of layers, let's say, or list of layers. That's one. But having said so, and understanding fully why that question is coming and where, I mean, when the IoT word is put on the table, everyone is like, oof, million of devices connected. There is much more probability that I'm going to get a security breach, etc. Again, we need to think on an IoT solution, just like the addition of layers, and all of those layers will have already security policies around that. That's the way it needs to be thought. Just because you put it together, it doesn't necessarily mean that a new way of security needs to be invented, right? The other element that I will say as well is think about this, taking it very seriously, as I said at the beginning, is a fundamental piece. Always think this in a very pragmatic way. What are you trying to secure versus the value of what you're trying to secure? I mean, I've seen as well, due to the hype of security in IoT, overspending solutions that do not make a lot of sense. You know, you're trying to protect data that, you know, it doesn't have an intrinsic value themselves, you might be overspending. And as a quick example of that, what I would say is for everyone that is facility management and building, or they are related to, they need to think that, as you rightly said, the solution can be as secure as the weakest link. And some of those platforms that we interconnect, as you mentioned, BMS, access control, etc., are not even very well protected because they come from a different stage. I mean, what I would ask is for the people to go back and ask, for example, if their card reader systems in access control, if the information that they send back is encrypted or not. I'll just leave the question there.
Right. Thanks for sharing that views. And while I wanted to ask again follow-up question, Khalid, you could hear us still. So maybe security is one part, but then there's a data privacy and data security, and both, in my view, are two different things, right? One is regulatory, and second is more technical issue of how do we secure the solution and how do we manage the data which you generate. So like quick 30-second on your views on data governance and data policies, that how do you think about this as a design?
Yeah, thanks, CK. So yeah, in terms of, I think is first and foremost, there's always our first number one when we talk about data, right? We talk about data governance, and that's the reason why we right now we are part of this, exploring or initiative with bodies such as SGTech in Singapore, talking about digital trust, and data governance is at the core of this discussion, making sure that the use of data. And again, we see this at this point of time that data, is all about ethics, how people can misuse some of these. Even as a developer, when we collect data, we ensure that this data are properly secured, and there are certain contingency, making sure that this doesn't leak out. And we take this thing very seriously as an organization, and that's the reason why we have a lot of data governance in place in conjunction with our internal policy, right? So I think it's already across business unit, across all sorts of departments. We make sure that the data collected are being used and not abused or misused, and that's where data governance come into play.
Sure.
So yeah, that's our stand on this data policy.
Right. I think I agree with you, and as Ruben mentioned, this topic itself is big enough for us to talk for 4 hours. So in the interest of time, I'm looking at the clock, and so just to summarize our discussion as we begin with that smart and sustainability are critical, right? But it's not just about throwing the technology, but understanding the value what we create, whether we focus on reducing the cost of operations, reducing the workforces, getting better experience for the users and tenants. At the same time, it's more important for the building owners and the facility owners to think beyond the cost, that how can we create the values, not just within the organization, but also in collaboration with tenants, come up with some new business models, that how can we engage with the tenants for longer terms, or create them some kind of customized and personalized services for some of them, for example. And then the questions of always about finance part of it. So it's not just customer or buyer. There could be other agencies involved, like in Singapore or many other world. The financing part of it, the new green bond models or other financing models should also be considered. And lastly, we talked about the technology. So technology is there, and personally, I can tell you as a technologist, and I talk to a lot of technology companies, be it a small startup or a big companies. Whatever you want today is available. I can get you tomorrow, but it's not about technologies, but about understanding the whole thought process behind it. But keeping this security as the first point of the discussion as we start the discussion of technology is not afterthought. We need to think about security from the day one, but at the same time, putting a very strong culture and the policies and framework about the data governance and the policies, right? Because as we discussed earlier, that uh, the data is the new economy and the currency. And as I say, the data is, in my view, is not a new oil, but what we need to understand is how to build a good oil well. Right? It's not just about churning the oil and without knowing what we want to build out of the oil. Are we building plastic? Are we building some material? But once we understand what we're trying to build out of it, then it is better to dig the oil. So data is a good oil, but let's focus on how to build a good oil well as such. So with that, I would like to thank first both of you, Ruben and Khalil. So for the audience, while live session will end in a while, but as you might know already, these platforms do allow you to do virtual networking. So once we end the live session, you will go back to the virtual lounge. You will see some seats if you're dialing in from the laptop. So you can sit there if you like to talk to each other. So the event will still remain open for another half an hour or so. So some of us will also be there to answer some of your queries, and if you want to discuss something one-to-one. So I'll see you and others also in the virtual chat. And so again, thanks everyone. We'll continue this conversation. This conversation is critical. I think it does require a lot more conversation among players, and Jetronics and Bostis are doing a very good collaboration already in driving such initiatives, and hope to see more of such as you go along. So thank you so much, Ruben and Khalil, and thank you
Thank
everyone
you,
for
TK.
joining
It
in
was a pleasure.
this evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you, everyone, and we'll see you in a networking lounge in a few seconds. See you around.
Bye-bye. Thank you.